Hello. Welcome to this edition of Jenmin and Sharma Tonight. Tonight we will be discussing the dangers of sex trafficking and forced labor in China, as well as their ethnic cleansing of Uyghur native populations. We will be doing this through the lens of international affairs, and we will be discussing how this affects the international system and how the international system aids and causes these things to persist in China.
What the Chinese government is doing to their people is breaking all forms of international law by enslaving, raping, and torturing their own citizens. Why, you may ask? Why is a nation doing this to their own people? They're doing this for economic gain and total control of their population. China is exploiting the innocent lives of women, children, and ethnic minorities, all for low-wage labor, smaller minority populations, and a more productive but less moral economy. Stay tuned to find out more. If you can't see how brutal China's being to their own citizens, I'll let this clip speak for itself.
So this step kind of blows my mind. Our friend here is testing each one of them. I'm not sure if it's for taste or volume or I'm not sure precisely what. I'm also curious if he is inhaling or if it's like a cigar, just quick taste test and exhale.
Corporations around the world benefit from low production costs, but they don't look at the human costs earlier on in their supply chains. The global market's need for cheap labor reinforces China's system, promoting what experts call neo-colonial exploitation, when economic gain is prioritized over human and ethical responsibilities, and all morals are just tossed out the window. Globalization acts as a driving force, creating multiple interconnected economies, but it also allows for the exploitation of labor in the lightly regulated markets. Without strict labor laws and no international sense of enforcement, corporations can just deny their actions to law while gaining profits from systems built on human exploitation. You see this a lot in China in these districts of factories where people are working for no pay for almost 20 hours a day, every single day of the week, and they're forced into these jobs with no way out.
When she was 17 years old, Mei Kain-o was abducted from her family. Over the course of the next 13 years, she was forced into 2 marriages and forced to give birth to 2 children. This is a story that is common across China, across the world, in fact, but predominantly among China, as it has one of the largest markets for trafficked women and children in the entire world. As shown in the figure above, the total number of young women and children sold in China from 2000 to 2013 was 92,851. While this number did go down for a few years, recently it has risen from about 13,000 children a year to around 19,000. This disparity and this huge problem continues to affect Chinese people, continues to affect their economy, and continues to affect their prominence in the world as China seeks to become a global superpower.
If you buy endangered animals, you could end up spending your whole life in jail, or worse, the death penalty. But what if you buy trafficked women or children? Your maximum punishment is 3 years in jail, even less if there was no abuse. I'll recap that for you. 7 years for buying an illegal plant, 3 years or less for buying a trafficked human being. This sums up China's attitude towards women. Why are we talking about this now? Because a new video has emerged on Chinese social media, and I have to warn you, it is not easy to watch. This video is from the Jiangsu province. Notice the woman's neck. There's a chain around it, and that chain runs all the way to the wall. This woman is battered, disheveled, and chained. Remember, this is happening in 2022.
Now we must ask ourselves, why is this happening? Why are women being trafficked? Why are children being taken and forced into essentially slavery or forced into marriages that they do not consent to? Well, for one thing, It's a huge part of the economy. Traffic victims are often aged 12 to 50, with a price range between 6,000 and 40,000 RMB, or 1,000 and 6,500 American dollars. It is estimated that 90% of these traffic victims are from Western provinces, specifically provinces with a large minority culture or a culture that is not ethnically Han, the primary ethnicity of China. They're sold into forced marriages in underdeveloped areas and also in areas in eastern China where the gender ratio created by the one-child policy is dramatic. And because there's a large number of women, as can be seen in this graphic, compared to the number of men in these areas, what ends up happening is the men will purchase wives. However, there's also a cultural problem within China, as they often allow, within communities, villages, they encourage, allow, and accept those who are purchasing women because they want to see their community thrive, and they see the purchasing of women as an opportunity to rebalance their gender ratio. And that's why we have an even more of a problem, is because when the Chinese government goes to investigate, or for example, when Western organizations go to investigate, often entire villages will lie to them to protect those who are perpetrators in this human trafficking campaign. Essentially, even the Chinese government protects these people often because they're quite useful for the Chinese economy and quite useful for the Chinese government as free and cheap labor. Additionally, Chinese criminal justice system often uses reform or re-education for people. And what is truly interesting about this is that they can issue 4-year sentences without a trial for minor offenses, drug addicts, sex workers, religious offenders, and critics of the government. That means that anybody who has a religion that does not fall under typical Chinese religion or criticizes the Chinese government can be given a 4-year sentence without a trial. And during that time, they're often beaten, deprived of sleep for days, and chained up in positions together where they're lying in their own excrement without food for weeks at a time. This horrible atrocity is not taking place in the 19th century, nor is it taking place in the concentration camps of World War II. This is taking place today in one of the most modern countries in the world. Anthony D. Smith, once a professor at the London School of Economics and writer of books such as Nations and Nationalism, has defined a nation as a named human population occupying a historic territory and sharing common myths and memories, a public culture, and common laws and customs for all members. Now, what is truly fascinating about this concept of nation is that China is obsessively attempting to create a nation state at all costs. And one of the ways that they're trying to do this is by assimilating smaller cultures, such as the Uyghur population in northern China. In order to do this, China has re-educated and detained 1 million Uyghur men and women and children and forced them into labor. In confidential speeches, General Secretary Xi Jinping has stated that large numbers of unemployed persons are liable to provoke trouble, and that company employment is conducive to ethnic interaction, exchanges, and blending, making ethnic groups imperceptibly study Chinese culture and therefore helping them to resist religious extremist thinking. Now, this dangerous thought process allows Xi Jinping and the Chinese government to go in, take Uyghur men, women, and children from their homes, force them into labor for up to 4 years at a time in a process that is known as detainment and re-education. And when this happens, the Uyghurs are forced to work in cotton fields, in factories, and they're forced to learn Chinese culture in these processes and lose their own culture in the process. The exploitation the sex trafficking, the ethnic cleansing of China, this is all taking place in the 21st century. And what's important to note is that this is not just affecting China. No, this is affecting the entire international system. How so? Well, the Chinese government is allowing and facilitating these sorts of things to happen, including the sex trafficking and the forced labor trafficking. And because they facilitate this, other nations such as Russia and the Middle Eastern nations, as well as the United States, are able to take advantage of this and are able to import trafficked individuals from China. As can be seen in this graphic right here, the US as well as Europe are involved in this. The entire world is complicit in what is happening in China and is aiding and abetting what is happening in China by allowing for trafficking of human lives to continue.
Some may attribute China's actions to them leaning towards becoming a failing state. Others see it as a step towards an autocracy led by Xi Jinping. But I see it as an overindulgence in a capitalist global economy. While this market seems to work with the US, China's overindulgence in money and goods has led their country to doing evil things for any financial gain. By letting companies that use slavery in the Uyghur region lead their nation on a global scale like Temu and Shein, China has displayed the lack of care that they show to their own poor citizens. From a global issues point of view, China's modern slavery crisis exemplifies the principle of structural violence. This concept shows us how institutions and policies can completely disadvantage not just the entirety of their population, but also specific and targeted minorities as well. China's government policies targeting the Uyghur people with the excuse of vocational training and de-radicalization are simply tools of racism and economic exploitation of their own people. By disguising their terrible actions as some sort of development for their citizens, China gains innocence to the rest of the world while they promote and continue their injustice. What I'm saying here is that sex trafficking networks thrive when economic growth takes priority over morality and human rights. These networks exploit minority communities, which is pushed by gender inequality and a sort of lack of legal protection. This is an issue that creates a much bigger problem, bigger than the population of China, bigger than the borders of that country. The UN and many international NGOs are playing a crucial role in addressing these crises, but often they face many hard-to-work-around limitations. Things like realism and liberalism in global politics help us see why liberal theories thrive with cooperation and human rights, while realism reminds us that states like China act primarily in their self-interest. For example, nations that rely on China in trade might put out symbolic condemnations, but avoid any meaningful sanctions that they would put against China for their actions today. The failure of international communities to make decisions against modern slavery shows us the limits of collective action when a country's money is at stake.
Now, this must not stand, and it is imperative that people become more educated about this so that they can learn how they can help.